Good. So welcome everyone to Governance Live here at the Caribbean Corporate Governance Institute, a daily feature we now have on our YouTube channel. And this as we lead up to Governance Week 2024, as we have very exciting things to discuss on our theme, Regenerative Capitalism, Promoting Exceptional Governance for Small States. And today, as we have done over the last week, we have a very special guest who is going to share some of her thoughts on governance with respect to the Caribbean region. And today we have Dr. Dionne Chamberlain Miranda from Belize. Dionne, welcome to Governance Live. We are so happy to have you.
Thank you for having me, and it's good to see you again. I'm looking forward to the entire Governance Week where I join you again.
Yes, and I should share with our viewers the fact that Dionne is our opening presenter on day two. Day two, we're in fact going to feature, for the first time, a discussion around governance versus management. Because I have recognized over the last few years, this is an area that creates a lot of contention for persons. How do you differentiate the roles between the two? So there would be a lot of discussion around those areas for day two of Governance Week. But before we go into actual Governance Week issues, Dionne, let's learn a little bit about you. I know, for instance, you are the chair of the Belize Coalition of Service Providers, but tell us a little bit about your interest in corporate governance and some of your board experience.
My interest in board governance stems from, first of all, within my management consulting firm, we do a lot of governance packages for boards throughout the country, whether it be government, NGO, private sector, or public sector. And besides that, I actually am a part of several boards. And my interest then became more apparent as I realized that many persons join boards because it's a resume filler and that it is something interesting to say that I'm a part of this or a part of that. And the reality is that we never really get to that part where we speak about your role on a board and your fiduciary responsibility by being on a board. And at the end of the day, the responsibility that we have to the beneficiaries of the organizations that we serve at the end of the day. And so as I see so many different senatorial select committees being started and so many people being questioned for malfeasance or failure to comply, and a lot of it goes back to I was not aware, I did not know, oh my God, I had no clue. And so it's really, really important for us to really take these roles seriously, for boards to understand that there is a governance structure and they've got to develop policies and frameworks that are in consultation with all of the stakeholders that are involved so that they can then prepare on their role and the role that needs to follow. And so that is where I believe that a lot of my interest has risen. And I'm excited to work with and for boards where you see that they understand that even the recruitment of board members requires this level of scrutiny as well.
And so how have you found the reception for persons? Because as you say, very often directors are happy to have the position and title of directors, but really resist having to learn new practices. And more so, for a lot of persons, it becomes a restrictive practice because in their
Certainly.
minds, when they accept the position, they see themselves as being at the top of the organization and as a result being able to direct resources as they want, whereas it's absolutely not that.
Exactly. So it becomes really restrictive, and then they believe that they are able to gain contracts, gain value out of being on a board, when in reality, being a part of a board restricts your participation completely. And that is when I believe that people become angry and they speak ill about a particular organization because they don't like to recuse themselves from making certain decisions and all of that. And it's interesting because the more greedy we become, the more governance has to be in place to control those who do not understand the role and the function of management and leadership and being on a board. And I love what you brought up just now because it made me laugh about the fact that board members sometimes feel that they are there to run the organization, and they can walk around looking at staff members and saying, I'll fire you, and do you know who I am? And and that's in the Caribbean. It's like people will say, I met up to this shareholder and he said that you know who I am, I could fire you. And it's so amusing because they're unable to. However, staff sometimes become a bit afraid and timid, and then they put themselves in a very tough situation because of board members who behave badly.
Yes, and I'm glad you have raised that because the truth is that is the extension we need to also address. Not only do directors not know and understand their role and function, to a great extent, neither does the staff. And as a
Oh yeah,
result, they too make poor decisions because they believe they have to follow directives
oh
given
yeah.
to them from the board, whereas there is a process in which the decisions from the board passes through the executive management team before it materializes and is executed on. But if there's ignorance on both ends, very often it is the organization that suffers.
Oh, definitely, definitely. That's one of the things that we don't understand is that after these board governance policies come out, it's absolutely important to train all of the staff members, no matter what level that they are, so that they can see where breaches could be occurring and that they can be the ones to bring it to light. I mean, whistleblowing is not a bad thing. Of course, we make it out to be a bad thing, but the reality is that we ought to be appreciative of those who stand within their own truth, having integrity and ownership, and understand the reason behind everything and the roles that we play in society, to not allow it to become the corrupt society that it continues to become because of our unwillingness to perform and support what is already in place.
Mhm. Yes, and so there are a number of nuances around that. It is behavior in terms of our expectations and our cultural practices, wanting to have that all-consuming power that no one should question you, or where there are persons who have alternative points of view, being able to even bring that up in a positive way so that it does not degenerate into an argument and blaming behavior. Do you see that as one of the issues you have to contend with in your training of directors?
Definitely. And it is absolutely important to ensure that well, first of all, I mean, the most important role, and it's not that I'm saying that any role is less important, but I believe that the chairman, chairperson, whatever we want to call them, that person has to be very strong and be able to drive the way that their boards are going to be going forward. Um, Sometimes it is absolutely necessary for you to repeat daily or every time there's a board meeting, what are the rules of engagement, so that board members understand what that is all about. And I extremely believe that in their training, I mean, proper onboarding packages are something that is often lacking as we bring in new board members. We believe that, well, that those two were on the board before, so we don't need to update them. The reality is that everybody needs that onboarding, and you need that reminder at the middle of the year of what are the rules of engagement of being on a board. But what is the one that I find that slips often is that we sometimes forget the mandate of the organizations that we serve. And again, good governance always reminds you of the mandate. And of course, having a report card for
Mhm.
board members is absolutely important. And also sticking to the rules of engagement, the articles of association, in terms of getting rid of board members that are no longer fulfilling their role is absolutely key and mandatory. I've seen boards have people who have never shown up to a meeting and yet they're unwilling to release them. And I don't understand the reason why, when the reality is that you could have functioning people absolutely fulfilling roles that could drive the organization forward. And whether it be a private and not for profit or a governmental organization, it needs to be growing. And I honestly believe that what is not growing or moving is dead. So you've got to be at some pace, whether you're I mean, recalibrating or restarting or pushing or going to somewhere new. You cannot be stagnant and call that growth. And so
Yeah.
that is absolutely important.
So I'd like us to continue in this vein a little bit, simply because I see it as one of the fundamental challenges we have in being able to improve our governance practices. So we have started a series at CCGI over the last 2 years. It's called Managing Board Conflict, because we very often have extremely bright people who are capable of being able to deliver so much that we can build better quality organizations. But conflict raises its head, and then there's an inability to resolve that for the interests of the organization, as opposed to who between you and I are going to win this battle.
Yeah, it does become that type of a contest. I can't say the word on the live here, but we know exactly what we're talking about. Uh, and this is something, again, I believe that there are so many good people out there that are rising in the ranks. However, as I look at boards, and I don't know if this is across the Caribbean, but within Belize especially, you will find the same people in every boardroom or every board location that you walk into. And you will also know the way that they're going to be run based on the personalities. That's one of the things that the Caribbean has got to get away from:
Mhm,
personalities. And we have to realize that, for us to have progress within our countries, we need to have a level of objectivity and a drive to understand why we are there in the first place. And sadly, some of us are there just to be seen and to be seen with amongst a certain grouping. It's like a gentleman's club per se. However, we have to decide why we're there and what are we doing there? What do we want to do and what do we want to deliver on at the end of the day? And again, once we have that clear vision and everyone in the room is at that same clear role or goal, how we achieve it is, I mean, again, and that's where we set the rules of engagement. What are the values that will take us through us achieving these objectives at the end of the day? And so it's really important that our chairman leads it.
mhm,
Um, However, it is also important to realize that as you need good leadership, you also need good followership, and that followership sometimes takes the role of leadership from time to time. In terms of the conflict aspect of it, one of the things that I've realized is that conflict that festers will absolutely erupt. And many times we walk away from these very hostile environments, sometimes are very heated meetings, and we either decide, like normal human beings, to freeze, to fly, or to fight. And the reality is that we ought to realize, again, go back to why am I here? What is my purpose? And if it is to look good, then you will always respond, just to reply and never to understand.
mhm,
And so it's really about you stepping back and becoming more emotionally intelligent, which is why I told you I love the fact that you are going into that topic later and I wanted to be a part of it, because emotionally intelligent people understand that it's okay to have emotions, but it is not okay to have your emotions affect the growth, the delivery, and the focus of whatever room, business, building, organization, board, whatever grouping that you're on. And so it's never about looking good. It's always about taking ownership, accountability, and responsibility, and realizing that you cannot allow your emotions to consume you at any different level. And if you master self, you will win. But if self masters you, you will lose at every intervention that you ever have. So it is always important to realize that while you lose your cool, you could be losing your credibility.
mhm,
While you're losing your ego, or while you're standing up with your ego and thumping your chest really loudly, you are losing people's beliefs, thoughts of you.
mhm.
And we don't realize this, but in the Caribbean, we love to pretend that nothing didn't happen, right? It's just like duvet. After I see you naked in the park tomorrow morning, I act like nothing happened. But the reality is that I know something happened, and I know where my brain is, and I know how I feel, and the reality is it's just pretense. I think that on a Caribbean perspective, we have to realize that we need to start confronting the elephants in the room. We've got to start dealing with the difficult issues, but we've got to decide what do we want to arrive at the end of the day, and what do we want to get out of it at the end. And that is where good board governance will always lie. What is it that we want to achieve? If we're trying to crap and ruin the organization, we will know how to do that. But if we're looking for success and growth, we also know that sometimes we have to look at compromise. We need to look at meeting each other halfway. And we will also know that any fight, a win-win position is going to always be the best. Always identify your BATNA, your best alternative to a negotiated agreement, or your WATNA. You know, what am I willing to give up or lose in this discussion? And that's where you really go. I mean, in taking on this conflict um, within any board, any environment that we're actually in.
Yes. So I understand that. Now I want to ask you if we could put it in a slightly different context now. So
Okay.
as you know, we have our opening keynote is Professor John Elkington. And Professor Elkington, who had conceptualized the whole triple bottom line model of people, planet, and profit. He is the chief pollinator for Volans. So we are so happy to have him. So he now has to come and pollinate the archipelago of the Caribbean, give us
Yes.
some nice, wonderful gems that's going to help us be able to overcome some of the challenges we face. For our small countries, what would you say if you had to tell Professor Elkington, what were the areas that may be challenging for us for our governance practices? We have identified one being the corporate culture in terms
Yes.
of having difficult conversations, uh, understanding what exactly is the objective we want, or more so, what are the outcomes we're looking to achieve from our tenure on a board? What else would you say would be some of the issues we need to focus on in the region if we are to improve our corporate governance practices?
When it comes to boards, which are clearly political in nature, I believe that the political intervention aspect is one that would really bode well from hearing from him on. However, one of the things that I often find when people say, well, the minister would want that or the CEO would have wanted that, I often ask, did he tell you that? Do you have that in writing? Did anybody ever say? But no, it was implied. No, it's never implied. Did he specifically tell you that? Is something that we often we have people derail processes and say that, because we want to look good rather than do good. So I think that that's one really great area that I think that Professor Elkinson could play a role in. I think that board member acquisition or makeup is one that I think within the Caribbean that we tend to want to fill it with a list of who's who rather
Mm,
than a list of who knows what. And the reality is that we always need um, experts
mhm.
and experts on different areas, and there's no need to really fill a board with just people who are just there for their names or for whatever. And sometimes I'm directly cruel and I say just to take up oxygen in the room. We we really need people on boards who are serious about the work at hand, really
Yeah.
delivering on the mandate and where it is that we're going to go. And how do we really feel that? And I think that it comes maybe even further back in the board governance aspect in the articles of association,
Mhm.
um, in terms of who should be on boards, what behaviors are expected from board members, and when should they be considered as not valid or reliable or delivering at the level that they ought to. So realistically, removing persons from boards when they're not functioning or adding persons to boards who can be highly functioning is something that I think we lack in the Caribbean, because again, we just seem to think that there's a monopoly on the intellect with just a few people, and we're just I mean, honestly, we're just you just really go to every different board and you're just feeling like it's the same chess pieces you're playing with. So I believe that acquisition of board members is something that we ought to play and take a lot more seriously, and definitely making sure that our board documentation has in the makeup and the buildup of how this should be. But I really would love to hear from him on report cards for boards.
Right.
Because at the end of the day, and I'm not, and sometimes these report cards can be done, self-done report cards, but you need to fill in that report card and submit it, showing that you are meeting what it is that you were supposed to be meeting at every given level. And I believe that makes a lot of sense. And we've done it for board governance documents that we've done before, and the boards run a lot better. The EDs don't feel that they're at the will of a chairman or a board who is exercising their power and role upon them. And you're actually seeing the mandates of the organizations being done, and they can stand up to transparency and scrutiny in whatever court of law or whatever um, area that they would ever have to, God forbid that they get to that point.
Yes. All right. So let's turn the conversation a little bit to sustainability as well. I know this is an area of great passion of yours as well.
Yes.
So there's quite a bit of work that has been done in Belize and in trying to ensure that we are more careful in how we treat with our resources so that we are not further eroding the
Yes.
resources and the planet. So share with us your thoughts a little bit in terms of how Belize is doing, or how there may be other countries that you see are doing better within the region, or what are your thoughts that you would want to share on our sustainability practices?
Yeah, on sustainability aspects of it, Belize has because of we have a blue bond that has been launched. We're trying our best to do quite a bit of making a lot of differences in how we operate. I'm really excited to see that within our fiscal incentive processes and even within our environmental compliance policies, that investors are being held to scrutiny in reference to how we roll out certain parts of investment within the country. And this is like in alignment with dredging, the use of overwater beds for the country, disposal of waste, and utilizing proper waste mechanisms that ought to be in place. Where I see the shortfalls is the length of time that it takes for approvals of um, licenses, for instance, where you have an operator wanting to do the right thing, but them being held back. And sometimes people do that shortcut that gets them to the point that it doesn't make sense. Another area that I see that is lacking is where we're spending a lot of time greenwashing a lot of things, pretending that we are taking care of the environment. We're listening to a lot of the noise in the environment, talking about how best the environment can benefit. However, a lot of it is really just let's do a walk to clean up this and a walk to clean up that. But I believe that we need to start getting into long-term sustainability, where we have proper disposals, we get into proper recycling systems. We don't look at only the minimum standards for what exists in the world, but we start a little bit higher than that. And then the minimum standards can be what we tolerate, but not where we start at, or calling that the highest particular level. So these are some of the concerns that I see within our corporate environments. And again, we do need to train our board members on these as well, because we have to understand that most private sector is geared at making money, and putting in place business ideas that include ways of protecting our environment are extremely expensive, and that may not be the direction that they absolutely go. So the reality is that I believe that a lot more training, a lot more exposure, a lot more guidance, and honestly a lot more calling out of when we are not following and breaking. However, within countries like ours, which are so polarized on a political environment, it's always going to be this party calling out the other party, rather than it just being, what is the right thing to do? What is the right direction that we should be going? But yes, I see a lot of growth and shift within the Caribbean, taking on new direction in how they're cutting down on food waste, especially. I believe that COVID helped us to realize that we don't need to be running massive offices and buildings, and a lot more people are allowed to be staying home. I see it in less traffic on the roads in Belize, especially. I mean, that's clearly one. Of course, what has suffered because of that is that the local transport, like the bus systems, are even more inadequate because they don't want to run for the few people on the road, and so now the few people on the road are just not getting to their I mean
Sure.
appointments on time. So I think that there is a careful balance that we have to make in how we look at sustainability at the long run, but it is an absolute important one. And for new boards or for old boards which do not have this as a mandate in their articles, it ought to be placed there, because I believe that what is not inspected can never ever be expected.
Yes, I think that is an excellent point. In terms of how do we set those practices in place that we may monitor it, that it can be reported on, because that more than anything will drive the behavior for the kinds of practices that we would want to see improve governance in the region.
Yeah,
So
and
I
we can't
want
just
to,
glibly use it and
Mhm.
then affect, say, transport for a local population. We have to make sure that everything that we do is balanced in creating, I mean, productivity and efficiency, and driving that for our citizenry as well.
Yes. Now, Dion, I'm really enjoying this interview with you. So we have reached a half hour, but I want to extend it by a few minutes if you don't mind.
Okay, yes, that's
Uh,
fine.
right. There are two things that I want to talk about. One is what are the physical, tangible things we are seeing as a result of not having made these sustainable type decisions in the past. So, for instance, here in Trinidad and Tobago, the waters and the ocean have warmed up. So sometimes it is so sad. The fishes on the beach can't seem to breathe because the water is too hot.
Yeah,
The temperature generally around, you can't survive
yeah,
easily. You can't walk out in the heat too much
yeah.
anymore. Because you get dehydrated, you're susceptible to heat stroke, and so everybody now has to find ways to cool down. And so there's a gradual adjustment that we have to make towards that.
Definitely. Directly in Belize, I can tell you that the amount of forest fires have really gone up substantially. And what is sad is that you're actually seeing the animals come out of the forest when these fires are occurring, and then you're seeing people poach on them immediately, and so basically, um, it's a displacement which could really affect the wildlife within these particular areas. Right now, we're having load shedding in Belize because we cannot generate the level of power for the entire country, and our backup service, which is uh, um, what do you call it? Part of uh, gas turbine generators, and also using the water sources within the waterfalls and all that is absolutely dried out. It's not sustaining us any at all. So we're seeing a lot of, I mean, it's impacting school children. We're not able to have classes. Um, you're talking about the fish, and that's being seen where we're very industrial, where we don't know what's going into the rivers, also where the rivers are stagnating. We're looking at these portable potties that, I mean, we love having them at our dances and our fetes, but these are really affecting the quality of the rivers that we're having right now, because that's where water does come from. So, I mean, it's really about sustainability and realizing that what we're putting in, and how it's actually impacting. It's really at a level that we're having a lot of air pollution, a lot of noise pollution, and again, getting rid of all of these solid waste is something that many of our countries are really having a hard time dealing with as well. So we've seen all of this occurring, the warming and all of that. And like you mentioned, it is also affecting skin. We're seeing a lot more people visiting the dermatologist and a lot more spend in that particular area. It's getting really bad for our local economies. And I can only imagine how much worse as the rest of the world is just making incremental moves and steps and just attending all of these conversations, but not necessarily doing anything better when they walk in.
Yeah.
And the reason I say this is like you go into a hospital, for instance. I mean, how many forms do you fill out? And these are physical paper that you're filling out. People are not realizing that the amount of emails is creating emissions as well. There's so much that is affecting. So again, it's the what should we do, but holistically, and where do we go from there? I don't think that we're having these conversations. I see our ministers and all these people traveling, and I see them coming back, but I don't see the lessons learned. What steps will we take? What does each of us as individual citizens need to do to make a particular difference, you know? And I think that's where the issue really lies.
And maybe that's the challenge for us, Dion, because that's where I was coming to for us to end this governance live today. We have identified several key issues and challenges facing us in the region. Ultimately, being able to improve our governance practices and ensuring that persons sitting around the boardroom focus on the purpose of their organization. So we're looking at outcomes that's going to lead to the sustainability of the organizations. All of those are aspects that we want to deal with, but properly getting that holistic view that helps us to be able to add the fact that the heat outdoors now means that there's such an impact on our everyday life, all the way up the chain to
Yeah.
what are the decisions we make in the boardroom, and therefore what are the practices we need to put in place. I think I agree with you that that gap is huge, and
Yeah.
it requires us to be able to come together and identify how do we do it?
Yeah.
How
Our
do we
people are intelligent,
how
but
do
they
we
need a leader to guide them as to what are the daily or the single steps that we will take to get us there. Um, we know everybody knows that recycling and separating your stuff is good, but we don't have a program like that in our country, and I don't see it in many of the Caribbean states either. Um, we need to be guided, and we need to make these campaigns be something that will take us into helping at a larger level. However,
yeah.
none of the citizenry are aware of what do they need to input at their individual and singular level, and then family level, and then school level. We're just learning about it as a conversation, but it's not necessarily anything that is taking action or traction, or how will we evaluate that at the end of the day. That is where I think we're lacking, definitely.
Yes. And I think maybe that's where we can bring governance life to an end today, because it leaves the conversation open for us to now see, how do we improve on this? Where do we go from here? And I'm inviting all of our viewers, if you have ideas and suggestions, if there's a way that we could bring all of this together so there is a proper program that's going to help us deal with the cultural issues, help us deal with the processes in a systematic way that is able to allow the region as a whole to be able
Yeah.
to improve. That's going to be an awesome thing we can achieve together.
Yeah, our people are willing to do, but they just don't know what to do and how to do it, and the resources and the tools to get it done. But just like with COVID, we were able to realize how we could stop it so that our countries were under control and were not impacted, because we knew we needed tourism to get back. Once we're given the storybook or the playbook, we will play it out. We just need that in our hands.
Yes, I like that. Thank you so much, Dion. Now, as we come to the end of this governance life, I do want to invite persons again. If you have not yet registered for Governance Week, there's still time. It's an online event, so therefore, wherever you are, whether you're in Belize, you're in Barbados, you're in Jamaica, you're in Suriname, or you're in Florida, you can register and join us for these conversations. Our opening keynote, Professor John Elkington, it will be this coming Sunday is the opening ceremony that will be held online. I also want to say thank you to our sponsors who are helping us with this, our fifth annual Governance Week. We have two gold sponsors, first Citizens Bank and the Massey Group, and we also have several bronze sponsors. So we say thank you to Angostura Limited, Republic Bank, the National Gas Company of Trinidad and Tobago, PwC, and we have, Dio and I want to share for the first time coming out of Belize, a sponsor, GA Rowe and Sons, which is
Wonderful.
also.
That's a client of mine. I'm so excited.
Yes. So we are getting persons who are coming together, and we just need to take the extra steps that's going to help us build that tapestry of what each of us can do so that we can improve on the way we are doing things. So all exciting. I love this work that we are doing here at CCGI, and it's so awesome to have persons like Dionne be able to connect with us and support and help us on this journey on how we can improve our corporate governance practices in the region. So thank you all, everyone. Dionne, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you and congratulations. Great conversation, great week coming up, and for all the great things that you've been doing. I'm proud of you.
Thank you. Thank you, Dionne. Okay.